Making a difference in healthcare requires collaboration between researchers, startup founders, and policymakers. This is what Delta is about, hosting conversations with leaders on the path to serious innovation. Hello everyone, my name is Rupen, and I'm a physician on a journey to meet people who are making a delta in healthcare. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode. This is Rupen. I'm an oncologist. I'm a researcher. I'm very interested in innovation in healthcare. And today I have Eirini with me on the call. She's an amazing founder. I've been talking to her, and I'm very impressed by what they try to do. I will tell you the story of how I really found them. So years ago, when ChatGPT started, I was like, I wish there was a chatbot where I can, or something, not a chatbot, I can ask it a question and go and tell me and find this information about my patient, the chart. Every patient chart is like thousands of pages. I'm not kidding. Ask for your records from any hospital, your own records. If you don't have any medical history, at least you can get 100 pages. Mm-hmm. And then I found this product. And today I'm very excited we have Eirini. Eirini, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruben. It's nice to formally meet you again. It's a pleasure to be here. So we're, and I'm the founder and CEO of Dyania Health. And I think you hit it on the head in terms of what you're referring to. We actually set out right before the pandemic with the mission to solve or to automate manual chart review. And so as you probably know, that can take 30 minutes, it can take 2 hours, depending on the complexity of the patient's history and how far back you're looking to examine certain clinical characteristics and how they're changing over time. And so we knew it was an extremely complex problem to solve from an AI perspective, as well as an infrastructure perspective, as well as even a medical glance as well. And so we founded the business. So I founded the business with the intention to bridge very, very separate universes into one company. And so we have about over a third of our headcount that's actually full-time positions. And most of our physicians started to get really excited about doing other areas outside of medicine. So not to say that they pride themselves in joking how they're ex-doctors, but basically they loved the fact that with the AI that they were training, they could have 15,000 times more impact on patient lives.
I love it. No, I completely agree with that. And I just want to go back to the beginning, because like you mentioned something. You mentioned like it takes 2 minutes. Like in my experience, it takes an hour. So for every new patient I see in the hospital, at least 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, at least 30 minutes. Every new patient I see in the hospital, if I'm going to do chart review, at least it's going to take 30 minutes. If the patient is complex, it's going to be an hour and a half for sure.
Correct.
I want to go to the beginning. You mentioned 2019. How did this idea come about? What happened? What led you to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I've been an entrepreneur in the natural language processing space for the past decade. So I was doing NLP in its many iterations and evolutions over time. So, transformers were invented in 2018. Large language models started to really become a thing much earlier than people knew. On average, the average person learned about ChatGPT. So, yeah, it's been, about the past decade that I've been solving for this problem in other industries. But if we go way back, I grew up in an all-physician family. So I was digitizing my father's patient records as a high school job almost 20 years ago. All my siblings are physicians, aunts, uncles. Basically, I always joke that the black sheep in my family is a pharmacist. So I'm an alien for sure. And I was majoring in biochemistry, about to go into med school, when I decided that I was just bored out of my mind with standard of care and the routine practice of solving the same problems every day. Of course, I hadn't been exposed at all to clinical research because most of my family is comprised of surgeons, so they don't really do much in the sense of clinical trials, if you will. But that being said, I switched out, fell into investment banking, and I was at Morgan Stanley in M&A. I actually started M&A by accident. So I never had imagined what mergers and acquisitions meant from a strategic perspective. And I just absolutely loved it from my first day because I could sponge up every element of information about a company. And it was a new industry basically every day. So towards the end of my time at Morgan Stanley, I started to work primarily on technology deals as well as some healthcare, and started noticing that extremely important decisions were being made without really any access to the data that was buried in free text. And so this rich information that's just buried in typed text was what enticed me to get into the NLP space. I started my first business then in 2014, and it was again actually I didn't even know that it was called natural language processing at the time. I just started taking coding courses in Python and went from there.
Wow.
But around 2018, I had a few early investors who actually owned hospitals, and they were getting
Mm-hmm.
acquired by Optum. And
Uh-huh.
their question to me was around the value of their medical record data from a clinical research perspective in terms of how it could help patients and what was there. And so for it seemed like too obvious of a problem to not be able to solve. So I spent about a year just understanding all of the complex stakeholders in the space and founded Dyania in the end of 2019. And we had our first pre-seed funding out of the gate closed January 2020, which
Wow.
was
And
fantastic timing.
yeah, no, it was like because like you mentioned the average person really doesn't understand what I did not understand what large language models were until like I saw ChatGPT, and then like boom, I fell in love with this. Like me too.
Mhm.
I have similar experience. Like I fell in love with the large language models, and since then I started teaching myself programming and Python and stuff like that. But without talking about me, going back to you. So you mentioned also, so you started Dania, but the website and like your LinkedIn and everywhere, you recently raised like around 10 million Series A
Mhm.
funding. Congrats. That's a big achievement.
Thank you.
How? How did you do it? Because my experience, I'm going to tell you why I'm finding this problem. Because
Mhm.
if you go to the investor
Mhm.
and tell them this is the problem I'm solving, they don't understand it. People outside of healthcare don't get healthcare.
Yeah. So I guess, if we go back to the fact that I grew up in an all-physician family, I started learning how to translate the world of medicine, and how doctors think
Aha.
into normal human. So that was
Gotcha.
a skill set I kind of grew up with. That being said, it was by no means easy in any way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. We raised out of the gate from investors who actually my first pre-seed lead investor had known me from my previous startup, which he had not invested in. And so it was investors getting to know me over time. And I think that is something that is quite difficult for first-time entrepreneurs. It depends on what their experience is, not to say that people starting a business for the first time can't do it, but you have to really learn it. But and
Yeah.
for me, it was my second business that really started to take off. So I already knew the ropes. I already knew, what took me 2 years with my first business probably took me 2 weeks with Dyania. So just knowing what to do and already having established a network really changed things. But also the fact that I think at the core, when you do your first startup and your first baby, depending on however it goes, regardless, it is still your first child. So your first child is, somehow grows up, and at the end of the day, you start to realize that your identity is not tied to that, and you could do anything to make money. Like I could stand on a corner and sell French fries if I wanted to make money in an easy manner. But I was most excited about solving extremely challenging problems that had not otherwise been solved. And so really it was just about the fact that I think no one on our team is here for just the money. You really have to love this because it's
Yeah. I can't
you're
agree
going
more.
through hell and back to be able to solve something that's never been solved before. So that has to get you excited to wake up in the morning. And I think that excitement and passion probably came through for a few of my early investors, and they've been with me ever since, and that was the start of it. So one led to another. But I always had this idea after my first startup. I always had established this idea at the back of my head that the worst case scenario is I go get a job.
Yeah, exactly. What's going to happen? You can always
Yeah,
go and get a job, 9 to 5. That's
exactly.
it.
And if that's your nightmare in life, which it's kind of for me, it's a nightmare. I love the element of the freedom of creating and building.
Yeah, I can't agree
And
more.
everyone has their own version of their nightmare, but it's not that bad. So
It's
we're
not
good.
bad.
And so when you have the ability to get up from the table and walk away, it changes the dynamics in investor conversation. So we don't. I would never be in a position where we're begging for money or we need money. And, sometimes things happen and you really do need money. But at that point, hopefully, and for us, I think we have a really good group of investors that have been with us thick and thin. They've come to my wedding. They've just,
Oh, wow.
they're friends more than anything at this point. So, I think it just depends on who you are as a person, and really when you find yourself, and then the second startup and third startup gets a lot easier. So
I really love the point that you are more friends with your investors. And like, I'm wondering if you're okay to expand more on this. Like, how did you build these relationships with them?
in person, a lot. And
Uh-huh.
I think that is often underestimated. In 2024, people
Yeah.
constantly just go on Zoom and everything is Zoom, 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 and they never really go sit down and go grab dinner or go grab a coffee. And most people's investors in VCs as well as mine live all over the US, but I was just combining it over the years with meetings with either new investors or with clients or with conferences. And so I've always just caught up with my investors continuously. And I think that continuous communication, a line of communication that was just always open, really were where I was able to establish the strongest relationships. And I can't do that with everyone. I've got a pretty decent sized roster of investors. And so when you're at the Series A, there is a certain point where legitimately I don't have an hour extra a month to
Yeah.
sit with every for each investor on my cap table, and it's really about just catching up in the moments that matter. I just came from Chicago where I was at one of my favorite VCs who've continued to invest year after year and follow on is Motivate VC out of Chicago, and they had their LP event. I combined it with, it was a American Heart Association. So I had their conference in Chicago. So I had some meetings there and went and spoke at their LP event. And, it was great to catch up with them and see them. I probably see them once, twice a year, but they're always there when we need them. So, it's a relationship that's been established. And I think that's what we sought out, with all of our investors that really stayed close to the business.
I love it. So in-person meetings. I want to switch gears a bit, and although like I'm still very impressed, I think I work with tons of startups. I think with in this age and day, like I don't see many in-person meetings, but like now it feels like no, I think in-person meetings bring lots of value. They say the Zoom, of course, save time, but in-person meeting brings tons of value.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned in the beginning, okay, so we mentioned many points. We talked about your amazing team that I want to touch base on, but there is something else I'm very, very, very excited to talk about, and we haven't talked about yet. It's like clinical trials. It's not
Mhm.
only about knowing my patients and knowing when was their last CT scan, when was their last mammogram if they have breast cancer. Oh, no, like it's does this patient or is this patient eligible for that clinical trial? Like, can you tell me more about this feature? Because it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and maybe to take a step back on the technology. So, we founded the business, set out with this mission to use NLP to automate chart review. And that in and of itself is a technology as a tool, it's a function.
Hmm.
We looked at very, very early on what were number one, the highest value and the highest impact on the most complex use cases we could think of. So it was literally, I was a glutton for punishment, but clinical trials was the first application of what we're doing. And it
Oh,
really
wow.
has been the most complex. And the reason being is that
Yeah.
a single clinical trial might have, 40 or 50 inclusion exclusion criteria. Those criteria will inevitably be deconstructed into objective questions that are defined clinically by our medical team to avoid vagueness and subjective confusion. And so it's a very intense process to even get the AI clean questions to look for within the patient's notes. And combine that with the fact that the clinical trial criteria are often related to information that would be in structured data in labs. The essence of the entire thing is that we are querying across over 80,000 data field types to find which parts of the medical record are relevant for which question. So for example, if we're looking for the histological subtype of a patient, we would search the biopsy note within the pathology report. If we're looking for the size of a tumor, imaging note. Different information will have various sources of truth
Yeah,
within
I
the
agree.
medical record. And so we had to take a clinical lens to define that and spent a lot of time mapping that out across the typical EMR data schema. But that being said, because we're looking for not only information across a vast database, we're also looking for information that is changing daily. So if you have patients coming in for radiation every day, they have dynamic, like changing clinical characteristics. And so
Yeah,
when
yeah,
we're
yeah.
looking for the exact window of time of when, let's say, a patient has finished one therapy, completed their washout period, has had their adverse events resolved except for neuropathy, and has a planned surgery in 2 weeks from now, that exact window is not just a needle in a time stack, it's in a haystack, it's a needle in a time stack. And so we have to be able to process that information for the refreshes daily as those patients change and for new patients that are diagnosed. Whereas with other use cases, like let's say we're reporting into registries, we will answer all questions once per
Mm-hmm.
quarter, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
once per quarter setup. So it's a larger patient volume. We're not filtering down patients as they meet or don't meet
Gotcha.
criteria. We're asking all questions of the entire patient population, but it's only, once per quarter, once per month. So
So if
it's a
this
different
hospital like have
structure.
like 5,000 or 10,000 patient records, every quarter you run all the records by your AI and then you see which patient fits into which clinical trial.
Yeah, absolutely. But the truth of the
Love
matter is
it.
that we actually started with healthcare systems that had far north of 3 million patients
Oh, well, fair
each.
enough. Like this is very,
So
very small
it's
number.
like
Yeah.
querying small countries, to be honest. But that's the
Yeah.
complexity of what we do. So
Yeah.
it
This is
has made the
crazy. Yeah.
problem much more complex than we even imagined.
Wow. Beyond this, so 3 million, like it's a huge number, but beyond this, so I want to go back to the early days and the challenges you faced.
Mhm.
And you had the idea and you wanted to build a product. How how did you approach it? Did you build a team first? Did you talk to people? Did you talk to healthcare systems? Like, how did you, what did you do first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think where I mentioned before that I had some the early investors that had owned hospitals and they were asking me about the EMR data and what value it had.
Gotcha.
Um, I was already in the space within,
Hmm.
I was working on NLP applications over the past decade. So I had been
Gotcha.
pretty active. Our first iteration, I stood up alone, to be honest. So we didn't have anyone on payroll until after the pre-seed funding. Um, that was, I had kind of set it up with a few friends because we already knew that, we knew the space. So I had the network and, investors wanted to give us $2 million to build it out, and they did. But really the challenge came was because remember, this was January 2020 when we raised our first capital round and we were just about to get started. It was actually a blessing in disguise that the pandemic happened because we had time to focus on the technology. And so where everything was closed, no hospitals were open for meetings. I couldn't sit
Hmm.
down or network or get to know anyone. Like the world had just, it was
Shut
frozen.
down. Yeah.
Yeah. My mom is actually Greek. And so in Greece, actually, they fared quite well during the beginning of the pandemic. So everything was open. And so I said, okay, well, maybe I can actually do work there. So I'll go to Greece. And I went on with a letter that I could cross over to the EU border that I was going for healthcare research. And in Greece, actually, physicians have a gap of 3 to 5 years before they start their residencies in many cases. So
Really?
yeah, so in the same way that the US government sponsors residencies, so does the Greek government. And at the time, Greek economic crisis, they were recovering, et cetera. They didn't have actually spots in the residency. So you have physicians that are graduating, not doing anything with their time except working for like a lab corp or the analogous in Greece.
Oh my
I
God.
would go have them, take USMLEs and take their step ones and then come work for us and annotate data sets. And so it turned into a
This
machine.
is mind-blowing.
It was incredible. So we had a full-time, and they were fantastic doctors. Some of them went on to go do residencies in the US and are still part of the Dyanian family. And and then the rest actually nowadays they're post-residency. So they moved back to Greece for personal reasons or whatever. But our team had come from NYU, MSK, et cetera. So it's been a very interesting experience for doctors who did not necessarily want to practice clinical medicine and were just enthusiastically engaged with the new world of AI. And so we basically took physicians and turned them into engineers and data scientists. So one of our
Wow.
doctors, I would walk by her computer every day and it'd be like end of the day, 9 p.m. and I'd see her taking a Python course and I go, you're not going to be in for a
I love
while.
it.
So she's now in engineering team. And then
This is
also, I pulled
mind-blowing.
another one out where one of our other clinicians is in the business development team because when we're going in with healthcare systems and even just it's not a sale, we don't really have sales. We have projects whereby we're partnering with the institution and my team will draft the protocol. It's incredible, but we're having a blast. So it's almost like
Yeah.
a business development meets medicine. And I think they couldn't really ask for anything else in terms of getting to travel to well, I don't want to add in the word travel because I think we live in planes these days, but it's fun to be able to be going in and speaking with some of the best physicians on the planet about what new clinical research studies they want to look at for advanced heart failure patients or polycythemia vera
Yeah.
patients. It's a unique place to be alive. So
I love it. I love it. Earlier during our call also mentioned Eirini rule or like set of rules or like on finding the right person in the healthcare system for listeners who are like trying to innovate this in this space. So can you tell me a bit more about this rule?
yeah, actually, well, we kind of joke lovingly that it's like the Dianian hunting strategy, but we
Diane,
usually
I love it.
stop.
Diane hunting strategy.
We usually
I'll write
start
an article about this.
top down and bottom up. And typically either through investors, our network, advisors, et cetera. It usually starts with someone with a C and an I in their title, and usually an MD after their name. And that is really, it ends up being, the stakeholder that has an appreciation for what we're doing, number one, and usually is quite excited about how that can expand at the institution. So as long as there's a medical or research informatics team involved, it's something that can have that support internally to scale. And then of course, really when we say hunting strategy, it's just getting our technology in the hands of the physicians and nurses so that they can play with it. And they're usually what we've seen quite excited about how they can be more efficient and actually focus on treating the patients and not have to spend time pre-screening charts. So it's actually quite interesting because we actually just beat humans on the individual level.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. That's like no brainer for sure. That's where AI
well,
is
in
really
accuracy, we
strong.
we
In
beat
accuracy,
humans.
finding the right information, DMR, in accuracy.
Yeah.
Oh,
And they
wow.
had like 2 weeks. And so if we go back to kind of how the AI was trained, there are many companies that set out to train models to do summarization or to generate a
Hmm.
note with the scribe type companies. If you want an AI to learn how to generate a note, you train it on 3 million notes. If
Mm-hmm.
you want an AI to deduce a singular conclusion from 5 different paragraphs in 5 different parts of an EMR, like a physician would, you give
Mm-hmm.
it an MD degree. So we train it like we would a physician.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and you wouldn't want a physician trained on just reading 3 million EMRs, by the way. We would be
Yeah, like that's mind blowing.
complete chaos, exactly. So, and then we train it with a residency where approximately 10,000 annotated cases
Oh,
are
wow.
are about comprised what would comprise of a residency, whereby Synapsys AI performs at above 90% accuracy vis-a-vis human
Mm-hmm.
physician. And that is deducing those conclusions from the medical record that it's reading.
Gotcha. I want to ask you, so you have a huge experience in this, and I think one of the things, the bottleneck for anyone who's trying to innovate in this space or train their eyes, like finding data. And if you don't want to talk about it, that's completely fine. But like, how do you find the data to train your AI in general?
Yeah, we have our data is proprietary, but it's
Hmm.
proprietary because we put 30,000 hours of physician time into creating our data set.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and it literally is something that is pretty well molded. Um,
Yeah.
and in the sense that, we had early advisors that were key physicians in the space, we were getting data from a few unique sources of like the raw data and then building annotations. And that was really what was more valuable than the actual data itself. And then
Oh,
even
yeah,
like
for sure.
textbooks, like in terms of the knowledge base and how we curated that, you would, I mean, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but most people would be surprised how much medical school textbooks contain figures and images that represent a certain concept. And so we would have to go through and kind of paraphrase what the concept actually meant so that the AI was learning from the free text, or like just stupid things like something like 10 to the third being confused with 103 with the AI model. Like exponents are not really handled well by large language models, et
Yeah,
cetera.
yeah, yeah.
There was a lot of data cleaning that we had to do, but from a basic starting point, we took the medical school textbooks and had at it. So
Wow. And that's, I think that's what makes you like really hard to imitate. You can maybe protect this with an IP, but you protect with a time IP. If someone else gonna do this, like at least they need 4 or 5 years and like tons of physicians and tons of annotations, like the barrier of entry is very high because you created something very, very unique.
yeah, and also to be honest, the longer physicians are seeing patients, the less we want them in front of a computer.
Yeah, yeah, I
Because they're
completely
just
agree.
not they're not unless they've been actively involved in certain fields or in informatics, and we have a few uh fantastic medical informatics advisors ourselves, but for us, if they're not actively doing anything within the data science space, the
Hmm.
farther they've gotten away from it, it's very difficult to kind of introduce new things. So residencies are long in the US. And so, I would
Yeah.
argue, number one, post residents are very expensive. So from a startup perspective, it's very difficult to build an army of
Oh, yeah.
physicians to do annotations. And secondly, if you have residents, even I've heard stories like people trying to do consensus things with like residents in the US and pay them extra money, whatnot. Um, they don't typically have a lot of time. So that
No,
is,
no, no, no. They don't have a lot
you
of
know,
time. They will put you. Believe me, I tried it before. It doesn't work. Presidents are so busy.
yeah, exactly. And they also are too smart for their own good in many cases. So
Yeah,
it's not always the most productive path or rabbit hole to go down. Not to discredit anyone, but they get through the residencies and they're they want to practice medicine. No one goes through a residency to not want to practice medicine. And so
yeah,
I think it really world, I guess, and it depends on what everyone's path is or research or whatnot, but it's really something that we built up as a program that was very much a conscious decision. And I think that would
hmm.
be really, really difficult for anyone to imitate. And you can't do this without physicians, to be honest.
Oh no, you can't. I
It's
completely
it's
agree with you.
absolutely impossible. I mean, I ingest medical school textbooks like as fast as I can, just because we have to know what the pathogenesis of disease if we're walking into a certain let's say, leukemia study, and I have to know the difference between acute and chronic. Like that's what's happening. So we educate ourselves as thoroughly as possible, and in the sense that we're teaching, and we have our physicians doing lunch and learns with the rest of the company. We've got our AI research team doing lunch and learns with the rest of the company, and that is the bridge that we've been applying. So it's really a unique setup that I think, good luck to anyone who wants to imitate
Yeah, it's
it.
very hard to imitate. I
Like,
completely agree with
yeah,
you. I
it's
completely
hard.
agree with you. Yeah.
And also, we
I've talked to
started
people.
in
Sorry, go ahead.
2020. So, if someone starts this year or last year because they heard about ChatGPT, to be honest, like, I wish them all the best, but we'll probably see them in
4 or
2030.
5 years ahead for them,
Yeah.
for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you because like I've seen people trying to do what you are trying to do, and it is hard. Like I'm not saying this because you're on the podcast or anything. No, no, technically speaking, it is hard. Like you
No,
have
no, we have given 10 kidneys to do what we're doing. It is absolutely impossible. It's a miracle that everything in the timing of what has happened has worked out in the way it has. And
yeah.
we one thing I think, maybe we didn't dive too much into about the Series A, but Cleveland Clinic was a very significant participant there, and
Wow, really?
no institution is at the healthcare system level that has more than 3 million patients is going to be an easy, target for a startup to work
Yeah.
with. Like, it's very easy to get lost in these types of institutions where we're effectively working with 10 different clients, because the cancer center is one. The cancer center will have the clinical research, and they'll have registries. The
Mm-hmm.
Heart, Vascular, and Thoracic Institute will be another, and they've got quality, they have clinical research, they have registries, et cetera. So there are so many different stakeholders, and at the end of the day, we're right now 35 people. It's not that we can't hire fast enough, we can't train people fast enough.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I think that's been the good problems that we have, but we're growing quite quickly, and I would say that success has breeded success, basically. So the physicians were happy; they were very vocal. And it's not an easy group. So, and not just Cleveland Clinic. I think any physician in the world is a more leaning towards the perfectionist side of.
No, I would love to put my hands on the product right now. Like I would love to have it, like to try it and to give it a try. Like it's something I'm telling you, I've been dreaming about. Like that's how EMR should be.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I think we're at time. I don't want to take more of your time. I know you had a very, very busy day. My last question. So, what advice would you give to someone who would start innovating in healthcare, startup in healthcare? What would you tell them, or what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, I would say they should look to connect dots that individual specialists are not thinking about. And
Hmm.
specialists, I mean domain experts, whether it's in medicine or it's in AI or other types of areas of technology. Like, I've even seen things in cybersecurity. There are plenty of fantastic ideas out there. Some of them will have infrastructure roadblocks, but you don't really necessarily need to view those as roadblocks. You can view them as effectively a moat once you get past them. So at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it just takes enough perseverance, and stubbornness, but it also needs to be the right idea. So I think a healthy level of detachment, to where if something's not working, to pivot quickly is
Yeah.
is good, but connecting the dots where other people, even experts in their domain, are not seeing the entire picture on the wall, is really what I think will make a big difference.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. This episode was a blast, and like I wish you all the best. I'm excited about the product without even seeing the product. Just the idea itself, it makes me very
Thank
excited. Thank you so much for
you.
being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.